Hello and welcome to the first session of the Setup Workshop by Noobs R Us. I'm your host, it's Andrew. Thanks for joining me today. Some of you that were there for the first session may be wondering, why are you making this again, Andrew? That doesn't make a lot of sense. Well, the original video is no longer with us for whatever reason. So I'm going to be re-recording this. There will be no back and forth. No one is joining me today. I will not be driving the car, but I will be going over everything that we covered in that first session so that you guys have this as a resource and a tool that you can use for the things that we covered in the first session. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. As always with these setup workshops that we do, we start off with a default safe setup, and it is a horrible setup. To those of you who are brand new to racing, this is not the setup for you. It's not the setup for anyone. Default safe does not lead to a predictable car. It does not lead to a car that will do what you want it to. It is just safe. It won't let you turn. It understeers like a mother, and we don't want to use it. So with that said, we're going to be going through the first couple things that we talked about in the first lesson, starting with the Aero page. And to get us started off, we're going to set a default. It's one of the few default settings that we have that really does not change. And I'm talking about the brake ducts. We got the brake duct in the rear, brake duct in the front. The default setting for 99% of what you're going to be doing in ACC is going to be 3 in the front, 2 in the back. What this is doing is this is allowing more brake ducts control how much air is let into the brake duct. The higher the number is, the more air is let through. The lower the number is, the less air is let through. And 0 is actually closed. You will not have any air coming through. So at 3, you're letting a moderate amount of air cool down the front brakes, and on 2 in the back, you're letting a bit more restricted air flow over the rear brakes. Basically, this is the setting you want to keep your brakes from overheating, but also not to have them too cold. This is just, like I said, one of the only real default settings that we have. Unless it's in ridiculously hot or raining or super cold, this is what you're going to use. And of course, if it's cold, you want to keep them warm, so you will close them more. Maybe it'll be 2 and 2. And if it's really hot, you might want to open them up a bit. But that is like extreme heat. I'm talking 36 plus degrees C or 110 degrees Fahrenheit. So not very common. Now, moving right along, we have our aspects of the Aero page. We have our ride height, front and rear. We have our rear wing and our front splitter. Those are the Aero functions of the car. We have this load and fuel test. Don't really worry about that. That's not very important. But what is very important is this front aero variation box down here. This percentage dictates how the entire car is going to feel dynamically. Now, I'm not saying that if you set this up right every single time, your car is going to be perfect and amazing. That's not the case. This just dictates the overall feel of the car. Is it going to be more conservative where there's a little bit of understeer, or maybe the car is just neutral? Or is it going to be much more aggressive where you're going to have oversteer coming out of corners that you have to manage, but you have a lot of front grip going into corners, and so on. Now, to understand this number, just know that every car is going to have a different percentage. The McLaren starts at 9.2. That's how it is. Every other car is going to be different. What I'm about to say is applicable to every car regardless of the starting point. Now, the higher this number is, the more aggressive your car is going to feel dynamically. That means more front grip, a little bit less front grip, more front grip, less rear grip. Sorry about that. And your car will overall be more aggressive. The lower this number is, the less aggressive it's going to be. Again, very safe. There's going to be a lot of understeer. Your car will not oversteer probably ever, no matter how hard you try, unless you like turn traction control off, which we'll get to. But this is a number you always want to be referencing. And as you get comfortable with the car that you're driving, this will be a number you always want to find out that you like and come back to that. So this, of course, is not the number that I know this car likes. 9.2 is too low, and we'll fix that here in just a second. So how do we adjust the front aero variation percentage? Well, it's very straightforward. The only things that can adjust this number are the splitter, front ride height, and the rear wing. Now, I'll make it easy on you. I think there's one car. I think maybe the Mercedes has a splitter set to 1. I'm not entirely sure. But the front splitter should, for most cases, be set at 0. All this does is slow you down. You can get more front grip on the front of the car without using this. So this is more of a speed detriment without much of a benefit. Now, moving on to ride heights. The ride heights, again, have a direct correlation on what this number is doing. So I want to essentially put more weight on the front of the car. I want more aerodynamic weight on the front of the car. So to do that, I want to lower the front of the car. And as you can see, it has now gone up to a percentage of 10.6, which is pretty dang high. That's over a percent difference just by 5 millimeters of ride height change in the front. So adjusting the front ride height of the car has a large impact on your front aero variation. Keep that in mind. Now, if we go back to 55, that's the ride height. So we can lower the front. Again, squatting that nose, getting more weight on the front. Essentially, imagine you're leaning the car forward and all the weight is leaning forward with it. That's the easiest way to remember it. That's not exactly what's happening, but it's the easy way to remember it. The next way we can adjust it is to increase the ride height in the back. So as we increase the ride height in the back, you can see we're back to 10.6. All right. So we had to increase the ride height quite a bit more, like 3 or 4 clicks more than we had to adjust the front to get the same effect. That's normal. That's how it works. You have to raise the rear more to get the same effect as lowering the front, and vice versa. So we'll get back to where we were, 9.2 at 74 mil and 55. So as I was saying, a safe setup, this is going to be a very conservative number. So the first thing you should do while you're making this setup is set the front ride height to 0 and then try it out. Give it a try. It's probably going to be very, very aggressive, very oversteery. If you're noticing it right away, just bring it back to the pits and we'll adjust it. But usually you want the front ride height as low as possible. It can be a little bit higher than the McLaren, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So set this all the way to 0, or the lowest number that it can go, and then give the car a try. After that, now we start making all of our adjustments with the rear ride height and the rear wing, but we'll get into what the wing does in a moment. So let's say that in this scenario, 10.6 of the front aero variation, again, this high number indicates that we're going to have a lot of front grip and the car is going to be very aggressive. And let's say this is too aggressive, and most likely it is. This is too aggressive for what we're trying to do. All right. So the only way to do that is, again, we want to move that weight back to the rear. We're trying to get more grip on the rear tires. We gave the front tires too much grip. Now we're trying to move that grip backwards again. The only way to do that with ride height in the rear is to lower the rear ride height. Again, think of like a teeter-totter, a seesaw, whatever it's called. And as we move that plank backwards, more weight is going onto the back of the car. So now drop it 2 clicks, 1 or 2 clicks, go back out, try it. At this point, your car should be pretty close to where you want it. Fine tune these 2 functions and then figure out what this number is for you. Once you get this so that the car is neutral, the car is turning, it's not oversteering, it's not understeering too much, this percentage is where you always want to come back to once you find that happy medium. So find that percentage and remember it, because you always want to come back for every setup that you get. If you're tweaking a setup, whatever the case, you always want to come back to this to start. You don't stay there sometimes, but you always start there. All right. So we talked about ride height in the front. We talked about ride height in the back. The last thing we're going to talk about on the Aero page is the rear wing and the overall downforce produced by the car. So in any track, race car, whatever, there's usually 3 or 2.5 settings for a car in terms of downforce. There's a high downforce setting where you have maximum or near maximum wing, rear wing, and again, we don't really use a front splitter. And then a low downforce is usually in a GT3 car, since they rely so heavily on Aero, you don't want to get much lower than 7, but this would be considered a low downforce setup. Now, when do you want a low downforce versus when you want a high downforce? If you have a track that has a lot of fast straights like Spa, Monza, those are two great examples for low downforce tracks. You want to have as little downforce as possible because downforce will slow you down. It makes you really grippy in the corners, but it will slow you down, so you want to have it as low as possible. Some high downforce tracks, an example would be Zandvoort, Snetterton. What's a more popular track that is high downforce? This is Barcelona. It could be a high downforce, but the slower tracks, the more technical tracks where you are much lower speed, there aren't very many long straights, that's when you want a high downforce car, because at that point you're not really losing too much on top speed because there's not very many opportunities to go top speed. So at Barcelona, this or any whatever track you're on, go ahead and try both setups. So we start at a low downforce setup. The wing is fairly low, 8 on this, so about 2/3 of the way up, and each car is a little different for what this value is. This is a low downforce setup. We're going to keep it here, and this is basically what you just tested out. That's your low downforce setup. So now we want to try high downforce. So go ahead and raise your wing as high as it will go, and notice what it just did to the front aero variation, right? Remember, the lower this number is, the more weight will be pushing down on the back of the car, the more conservative the car will be. This, what we just did to the car, now I know for sure, without even needing to go out, that my car is going to understeer like crazy. I will never oversteer this car, which is great. We don't want that too much, but I will not be able to turn because this percentage dropped almost 2%, which for the sake of cars and adjustments, that's a huge difference. So to adjust this back up where we wanted it, so we lean the seesaw backwards towards the back. Now we want to move more of that weight forwards. The only way we can do that, we can't lower the front anymore, so we have to increase the ride height in the back. And again, you want to get back to that percentage of where you were, because we just increased the downforce of this car significantly. This is a much more aerodynamically involved car. You'll be a lot better on high-speed corners, so on and so forth. However, we did not change the feel of the car or the dynamics of the car because the front aero variation stayed the same. If the front aero variation stays the same, you can adjust ride height and rear wing all you want. The car will feel just about the same. It'll be faster in some areas, slower in some, depending on the downforce that you have. So again, if you were on Spa with this, you're going to get real slow comparatively, relatively, on the straights, and you'll be much quicker through the corners because of the aero that we have. So go to a high downforce, give it a shot, see if you like it, see if you're faster on the track. You always want to do about 4 to 5 laps minimum before you make any assumptions about what the car is doing. If you're faster, if you're slower, because your tires really haven't warmed up until lap 3, and then you want to give it a couple laps to see what the car is actually doing. All right, so with that said, again, give it a shot, see what a high downforce setup is like, and then let's say you find that you're quite a bit faster in the corners, but you are losing speed on the straights. You can lower it by 1 click or 2. Now you're at about a medium downforce, somewhere in between. And again, every time you change anything on here, you have to double check your front aero variation and adjust accordingly to get back to where you were. So I was at 10.3. This gets me back to 10.3. Car should feel the same, However, now I will be faster on a straight, maybe a little bit slower in the corners, but you always want to have this number be the same. So that's the Aero page. Ride height, rear wing, brake ducts, and this one right here, big one. All right. So that's the Aero page. Moving on to the next thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go into the electronics page, and you may have to make some adjustments to your Aero after this. Just a fair warning. Another one of the defaults, again, there's not very many, but this is another one of them. So we have TC, ABS, ECU map, telemetry maps, TC2, or as I like to call TC, TC1. We're going to go through these really quick, but we're going to start off from the bottom. TC2, much more of a intermediate to advanced setup tool, but for, again, 95% of the time, you can set TC2 to 0, and you will be just fine. You can control the rest of traction control just with TC1. I know it says TC, I call it TC1 to keep them straight. All right, so turn TC2 off. Basically, TC2, if your car even has it, TC2 and TC1 work together, of course. Traction control is telling the car when you want traction control to instigate, and it has a minimum amount. So you're telling it, I want this much at this point. I want this much traction control, and I want it to happen now. Traction control 2, all it does is once traction control is on, this controls how much power traction control pulls to try to keep the car from spinning out, or whatever the case is. Now again, traction control 1 by itself has a minimum value that it will, cut power to keep your car from sliding. So even with traction control 2 all the way off, it's still doing something. So don't freak out. You can have TC2 off and it won't hardly affect your car at all. Just leave it as it is. Now, moving up from there, telemetry maps. Unless you are logging your laps and you want to see exactly what you're doing, which I know a lot of apps these days, they do this for you. Unless you're logging your apps, I know like Motec uses this, I'm pretty sure still. This is irrelevant. Don't worry about this. ECU map. Now, the McLaren has one. Some other cars will have a starting point that is not 1. Never touch this. This is, again, one of those defaults. Never touch this. ACC doesn't even tell us what all the maps do, so don't leave it alone. Should I switch to the rain map? No, don't. Turn traction control up. Be easier on the throttle. Never change the ECU map. It is not beneficial in this game. Moving up from there is ABS, or the anti-lock braking system. And again, the higher the function is, or the higher the value is, the more invasive the system's going to be. And the lower it is, of course, the opposite. ABS at 6 is pretty darn invasive. And you might say, well, so long as it's not letting my tires lock up, it's fine, right? Well, here's how ABS works. ABS is guessing when it thinks your tires are going to spin, and then depending on how high this is, it will actually intervene before you even lock up. If it thinks you're going to lock up, it will release pressure from that brake, even if you haven't locked up yet. And what that does is that will drastically increase your braking distance. So you want to lower it down so that basically the system is anticipating a lockup and releasing the pressure when the tire is actually locking up. Usually that's at a much lower setting, like 2 or 3. If you're new to ACC or new to setups, try 3. If you already know that you like 2 or 1, just go from there. But that's how ABS works. If you find yourself sliding a lot, increase this. If you find that you're hearing the brakes and the tires kind of chirping as you're hard on the brakes, you may want to turn this down, because you don't want that system getting too much in the way of your brakes, because again, it'll just make you roll and you're not even close to slipping yet. So traction control, again, similar to TC1, and we covered it briefly. Traction control tells the engine when to cut power at a minimum amount. So basically, the higher it is, the earlier traction control will kick on. The lower it is, the later traction control will kick on. And 0 is actually 0. It is turned off. It is not like some minimum, oh, it'll always kick on. 0 is off. Never do that. Traction control is your friend. So I would say every car is different, of course, with all these things. Some cars need a high TC setup, like 6 or something along the lines. The goal is always to have this as low as possible. That doesn't mean it's going to be low. It might not be too. And everything is dependent on your level of comfort with the car, as well as your experience level racing or sim racing or whatever it is. So starting at 6, drop it down to 5. Go try it. And again, this is after you've done everything to Aero. Try it out. See if you're sliding. See if you can control the car. If you can, and you notice that the engine is kind of bogging down coming out of corners, lower it again. Get to a point where the car will actually spin out from behind you, because that's when you know you've gone too far. Usually with setups, you have to go too far to realize where you need to come back to. So keep lowering this until you can't anymore. And hey, if it's at 6 and that's all you can do, that's totally fine. Leave it at 6. But again, the goal with setups is to have this as low as possible and to have traction control on as little as possible, because all it's doing is slowing you down. It's keeping you alive, but it's also slowing you down. So that's all the electronics. All right. The next thing, and this is something that is very, very, very important, but we're only getting to it now because I want to touch on the other things first. Tire pressures. Tire pressures. Everything else we just talked about is great and lovely and fantastic and, you know, all that jazz. If your tire pressures are wrong, none of it matters. If your tire pressures are way too high, none of it matters. If they're way too low, none of it matters. So, for those of you who don't know already, the range that you want to keep your tire pressures in, hot tire pressures, which will show up right here after you've gone and done a couple laps, you want this hot tire pressure to be somewhere between 26 and 27 psi. So as you go and do a couple laps, your tires will warm up. As you return to pits, assuming you haven't spun, because if you spin or you wreck or whatever, go back out, try it again, because your tires will be super hot from sliding. But if you run a couple laps and your tire pressures are warm, again, 3 laps minimum before your tires are even considered warm. So you run a couple laps, you come back in here, and let's say this is 25.5 psi. Just lift this up the same number of psi to get to where you're going. It's very straightforward, not much to it. That's tire pressures. And as you change parts of your setup, mainly brake ducts and mostly brake ducts, and as you're going faster with your car, your tire pressures will change as you change your setup. So always come back to this every once in a while. Just be like, hey, are my pressures right? Double check them, fix them if you need to. All right, so like, because if you're driving around and your back tires are not spinning at all because you have a high TC setting, but then you lower your traction control setting, and now your back tires are spinning a lot more and they're kind of sliding over the ground, your back tires might be super hot. So as you make these changes, just make sure you're coming back to your tire page, checking your pressures. Very, very important. All right. And then what was the last thing I spoke on in this one? Honestly, I think that's about it. We'll cover one more thing that may have been covered in was not covered in the second lesson, or must have. We'll just go through the rest of the tires here. So we talked about pressures. Very important. Let's just finish up with the tires. The next thing that will, and this we talk about this more in the second one, is camber. Camber is how you control grip levels mid-corner and corner entry. Basically, whenever your car is turning, camber is being used. Now, what the heck is camber? Camber, if you're looking towards a car, so if you're standing here by safe and you're looking at the car, camber is just the difference in angle between the bottom of the tire and the top of the tire relative to the center of the car. So if the top of the tire is in and the bottom of the tire is out, so there's a slight angle upwards, that's camber. That is considered negative camber. You always want negative camber. I want to see, and it doesn't even let you not do negative camber. But basically what camber does is as the car rolls from side to side, left to right, the tire is actually, the wheel is actually rolling as well. So as the car leans over, the tire leans over, and if you have your wheel kind of angled up a little bit, as you lean it, the tire actually flattens out and you get more of a contact patch. What the heck does all that mean? You get more grip in a corner. Higher, or excuse me, I should say, lower camber numbers, so negative 3.8, I think this goes to negative 4, the back goes to 3.5. The lower the camber is, generally, the better grip you have going into corners for that specific tire. So that's what camber does. Caster, as far as I'm aware, caster does nothing in ACC other than increase the weight of the steering wheel. It really has no other effects. I'm sure there's some physics stuff going on that's a little different, but the way the car feels and the speed of the car are largely unaffected. The higher the caster is, the heavier the steering wheel is going to feel. That is 99% of what it does. Don't worry about the other 1%, as I have not seen a drastic increase or decrease in any kind of performance change with caster. All right. And then the last thing here we'll talk about on the tire page is toe. So again, standing at the front of the car, looking at it this way, toe is whether or not the back of the tire and the front of the tire are in line. It's the angle relative to those 2 points. So if the back of the tire is in towards the center of the car and the front of the tire is out, it's always based off the front. So that would be considered toe out or negative toe. What that does is it, long and the short of it, toe out leads to a car that is eager to turn and less stable on a straight. It also leads to increased tire wear, which we'll get into later. So if you have toe out or negative camber, excuse me, negative toe, sorry, then the car will be eager to turn and more stable in turns, and it will be less stable slightly in straights. It's not like the car is going to spin out on you. And if you find that you can't keep the car straight on a straight, it is not toe's fault. Chances are something's broken. But it gives you more stability in a corner and a bit more of an advantage grip wise in a corner. So don't go too far with it. It does have an effect on braking distances. If your toe is too far out, it will negatively impact your braking distance. Not a lot, but it is noticeable. So the farther out the toe is, the more aggressive the car is going to be going into corners. Now for toe in the rear, realistically, it's, so as you can see, we have negative toe in the front, positive toe in the back. As a generalization, toe in the front should always be negative. Toe in the back should never be negative. Negative toe in the back leads to a very unstable car, very aggressive car. Makes it twitchy, makes it quick to turn. But we want the front end to be twitchy and eager to turn. We want the back end to follow the front. And that's what positive toe does. Really, don't worry about toe too much in the back. You can leave that alone, but you can mess with the toe in the front. Right? And then the last thing we talked about in the first lesson, actually I covered a bit more in the tires, but the last thing we talked about in the first lesson is brake bias. That's one of the key functions of car setups. Brake bias, what it is it is a percentage of brake pressure on the front tires. That's what this number represents. So right now, 58% of the brake pressure of the car, so all the brake pressure, is going to the front tires. All right. If we move it back, now we have 47% is going to the front, which makes 53 in the rear. And if you go up to 68, that's 68% of the brake pressure is going to the front. And quick math, 32% is going to the rear. Now, what the heck does all that mean for you? Brake bias has one job. It controls the rotation of the car going into a corner. Now, what the heck does that look like? If you are a Porsche driver, this is most likely going to apply to you. Brake bias will basically control the rotation, right? The lower the number is, the lower this number is, the more rotation you are going to get under braking going into a corner. And what does that look like? That looks like oversteer. If you're braking going into a corner and the back end is coming out consistently, that is brake bias hard at work, basically. And it is too far backwards for your current driving style, the current setup, the current track, whatever it is. As it stands, if your back end is coming out, brake bias needs to be adjusted. Move the brake bias forward. Again, we want to increase that percentage. We're increasing the percent of pressure being sent to the front. Move it forward until the car stops doing that. It's as simple as that. Now, if you're on the other end of the spectrum and you want the back end to rotate more, let's say like the McLaren starts at 58% in the default safe. Again, very safe. I want the car to rotate more going into a corner. I will lower that percentage. All right. And what that does is as the rear brakes are doing more work, they're more likely to more or less do like micro locks, from what I understand. Basically, the more pressure is towards the back, the more the back is more or less dragging behind the car, and it will allow the back end to kick out from behind you. Again, there's somebody smarter than me that really understands the physics of that, but the long and the short of it is, if your car is oversteering on corner entry, which means that the back end is coming outside while you're going into a corner, move it forward. If you want the back end to move outside more, move it backwards. And by when I say forwards, I mean make the number bigger. And when I say backwards, I mean make it smaller. So what we covered today is a quick summary. We talked about ride heights, the whole Aero page. We talked about the front Aero variation, which is one of the most important things about a car. How you can adjust that with front and rear ride height, whether you want a high downforce, a low downforce, or a medium downforce, and how you control that with the rear wing. We talked about tires. We talked about how important pressures are. We talked about toe, camber, and caster. Again, caster's not very important. Camber is grip in corners, and toe is eagerness to turn and stability in corners. Really don't worry about toe too much starting off. We talked about electronics, how TC2 is not very helpful. Telemetry laps and ECU map should not be adjusted really ever. ABS, you want that at a lower setting because you don't want the car to try to unlock brakes that are not yet locked up. And traction control, and how you want this as low as possible. Same with ABS. You always want these as low as possible. And then the last thing we spoke on was brake bias, which all it does is it controls the rotation of the car in the braking zone. It does not affect the car at any point anywhere else on the track. It is only when you're braking. And this could be braking mid-corner too. Like if you're trying to fix something and let's say you go too wide, you go deep into a corner and you tap the brakes and the back end comes out. That is rotation under braking. That's all this controls. If you are over-rotating, where you're oversteering going into corner under braking, make this number bigger. You want to move the brake bias forward. And if you want more rotation, if the back end is not rotating enough, you want to decrease the brake bias or move it backwards by making this number smaller. So thank you so much for watching this session. The next two will be with other people and they'll be there and so on and so on. And the last three that we're doing, we've covered pretty much everything. We'll get into some different stuff. So thank you again. Hope you enjoy. Hope you got something out of it. And I will see you next time.